What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Outdoor Sports Club channel. I've been meaning to do a concealed carry Second Amendment kind of a video. This isn't... YouTube's kind of throttling me anyway, so for a while I didn't really talk about this kind of stuff as much as I used to. Shame on me for that, but I don't make any money off of YouTube anyway. I've put a lot of time and effort into YouTube, and there for a while we were making an okay amount of money, but it got cut back pretty quickly. Part of that's on me, and part of that's on the business decisions that YouTube has the right to make. So I'm not trying to complain about that necessarily. I wish they wouldn't. I wish they wouldn't crack down on what I consider First Amendment rights, but they can do whatever they want to do, I suppose. Anyway, that is all to say that I don't really care, and I want to talk about the Second Amendment a little bit, because I've seen a lot of people here in Oklahoma and around me, people talking to me, people talking around me and things like that, that don't, that I think, I believe, are misunderstanding the Second Amendment. And it's fairly easy to misunderstand, I suppose. I don't want to go through all of the different arguments in this video, because quite frankly, it would take me 2 hours to go through. But essentially, Oklahoma in November is going to go to constitutional carry. And I haven't yet looked into exactly what that means, but essentially what it means is there's no longer a license requirement to carry a firearm concealed or open. I think that it's probably, I don't know, I think it's probably going to be pistols only, but I don't know that. It could be right. There could be some way, method in the law that allows you to carry a long gun as well. I'm not really for sure, but I need to look into it, because it'll change the way I handle things when I'm driving around, if it means long guns as well. I just realized my camera is really cranked over as well. Part of that's the angle that it's sitting, but anyway, everything's not parallel behind me. That was actually passed by the House and Senate. A constitutional carry bill was a year or two ago or something like that, and Governor Fallin vetoed it or let it just sit. I don't really remember what it was. Stitt, when he was running, said if it passes again, I'll pass it. Pretty soon after he took office, the House and the Senate sent it through. They passed it, and he signed it really quickly, and so it's going into effect in November. I'm stoked about it. There's been a lot of confusion about it, I think, and some even by me just not knowing what it is exactly. But it is a constitutional carry bill, so it's going to allow carrying without a license requirement. I am still going to get my concealed carry permit simply for the reciprocity in other states, so that I can carry in other states whatever their laws are. But I'm very happy about it, because any license requirement that I have to go through before I can get before I can observe my Second Amendment rights is a violation of the Second Amendment. And some people disagree with me on that, and I don't want to talk about the emotions. A lot of the arguments that I've heard were emotional arguments, and some on both sides, but a lot of people were thinking that it was going to turn Oklahoma into the Wild Wild West and things like that, and it just simply won't. That's not the way it works. People are already carrying a bunch of guns. The people you're worried about were already carrying guns anyway. So people like me, I also wanted the option of carrying a gun, so I went through the license requirements, which was expensive, time-consuming, and quite a bit of a hassle, just to observe my Second Amendment rights. And then there's still stipulations about how and where I can carry, so that's a violation of the Second Amendment, because the Second Amendment says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And I'm not skipping over the militia statement on purpose. I mean, I am on purpose, because those are two different clauses. And I want to talk about them a little bit separately. In fact, let's deal with the militia thing real quick, because I've actually been in a conversation recently about the militia thing, and people are like, it said something about the militia in there, so it's not for you to carry, it's for the militia to carry. And that's true. You keep in mind what the colonists went through to get to that point. And that's brought up all the time. Each and every person was generally, or each and every adult male was generally an owner of a firearm and in a militia. Okay, and they were in a well-regulated militia. Well-regulated, not necessarily meaning well. I can't think of the other word for regulated that I want to use here, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there are a lot of laws and regulations placed on that militia. It can also mean that they are well drilled, they were properly drilled, and they are properly equipped. Okay, and the militia's job was to fight if they needed to against a tyrannical government or an invading army, something along those lines. So they needed to be equipped and trained so they could do that job properly. Okay, and that was the reason for being well regulated. So we could definitely argue that as a conceal or as a Second Amendment fan, you can easily argue against the whole well, it's meant for militias, just from that standpoint alone. So some people point to the National Guard, and that's one that doesn't really hold any water because the National Guard is not a militia. If the National Guard's job was strictly to protect the state or the nation against invaders in the event that other members of the army were abroad, helping with natural disasters, things like that, which is part of what the National Guard does. If that was all they did, that would be fine, but we've been deploying the National Guard across the globe for some time now, a long time, and that's not, in my opinion, what a militia would do. A militia would be normal people that have real jobs here at home, that that they drill, they are trained, they know how to handle their firearms, and they all have some sort of a common goal in a very specific set of circumstances. So an enemy invades, okay, that militia gets together, they leave their jobs, they get together at a pre-appointed location, they get their equipment, and then they go and they try to repel those invaders and defend their nation and their people against those invaders. That would be more like what the National Guard, I think, was originally intended to do. Maybe not. We could talk about that a little bit, but essentially, the National Guard is not that kind of a group, so it's not really a militia. And this isn't anything against the people in the National Guard. They're doing what they're told. They're doing what they have to do. So, and you know, I'm very thankful that they do, just like I am all the service men and women. But the militia clause doesn't really hold a lot of water. And we could talk about this in depth, but more to the point is the fact that the next part of that, so the bit about the militia is one part, and then we have like a hard break almost. And the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So shall not be infringed is directly linked to right in that sentence. And I'm not an English teacher, I'm not that great at grammar, but shall not be infringed is directly linked to right. What right are we talking about? The right of the people. Okay, the right of the people to do what? To keep and bear arms. To own and to carry arms shall not be infringed. That can stand on its own. That statement can stand on its own. Why they didn't make it stand on its own is up for some debate. I personally believe that because of what the colonists came out of, because of what the writers of the Constitution came out of, they wanted to make people understand that the fact that they had people in militias who owned firearms and knew how to use them and could carry them around, could get them on very quick notice. Minutemen, remember, they could be ready on a minute's notice or in a minute's notice or whatever. Because of that, they were able to secure their freedom from what they considered a tyrannical government. That's very important. So I think that they wanted to codify that in the Bill of Rights and say, here's what we came out of, very quickly say, here's what we came out of, here's how we got out of it, and this is why we want to secure this right for our people. Okay? To me, it's very clear that the Second Amendment means that the right of the people, all the people, to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And that's what it means. So, on to my next point. We've discussed the meaning of that. You may disagree, you might agree. There's some arguments that you can make either way, but I think that those are powerful arguments to the simplicity of the meaning of the Second Amendment, and that it means that people like me who aren't in the military have the right to keep and bear arms, and that that right shall not be infringed. So the reason I'm for a constitutional carry in every state is because if you want to change the Second Amendment, you have to change the Second Amendment in the Constitution. So if you want me to not be able to carry an M16 or an AK-47 or a pistol or a shotgun or whatever, you need to change it in the Constitution. That's my feeling. Now, I know that we've gotten used to all kinds of laws on the books. There's laws, there's regulations everywhere. I'm not an anti-regulation guy. I think that the proper regulations are actually very, very good for society. I'm a big believer in not just doing whatever you want. I do think you should be able to do pretty much whatever you want as long as you're not getting in anybody else's way. I'm a libertarian, but I don't think that you can just not pay your taxes just because you don't want to pay your taxes. I may not like my taxes going to certain things, but I do feel like I have a duty to pay some amount of tax. I just wish it were different. I wish that it were a nationwide sales tax, for instance, instead of an income tax. I wish we didn't get taxed repeatedly on the same monies sometimes, but that's a totally different story. I'm trying to make the case that I'm very libertarian, but regulations are oftentimes necessary for the progress of society. And I'm using progress in terms of like for people, for individuals to progress by their own hard work and their own decision making, good decision making. I'm not talking about necessarily the greater good. I'm not talking about society cracking down on this guy so that this group of people over here can succeed. I'm just talking about the government getting out of the way and all the people getting out of each other's way and allowing everybody to make good decisions and to progress in their own lives. That's the libertarian regulation balance that I like to try to strike if I can. So I know we've got all these laws, but to me, you have to change the Constitution in the Constitution, just like we did with Prohibition. They got it wrong. They enacted Prohibition. They got it wrong. They fixed it later. Okay, slavery was wrong. We fixed it. Women didn't have the right to vote. We fixed it. Presidents could be president for as long as they got voted. We fixed it. We fixed those kinds of things in the Constitution, and I think that if it's not in the Constitution at all, the Constitution says that it's the right of the state to decide. If it's in the Constitution, you have to fix it in the Constitution. The states don't get the right to decide, in my opinion. That's what I think the Founding Fathers intended. So I'm an originalist when it comes to the Constitution. However, I do believe that we have to figure out how to apply those things today. Okay? I'm not saying we change the meaning of the words or what the Founding Fathers meant, because things have changed. So the idea that you can have a musket, for the Second Amendment guarantees you the right of the musket, but not anything else is complete and utter nonsense. If that were the case, you need to turn off your internet right now and stop watching this video. And the only news you can partake of is if you go down the corner, and you give money to the little boy on the corner that's, hear ye, hear ye. Oh, that's the town crier. Read all about it. The kid that's screaming, read all about it at the top of his lungs. You got to go buy the paper from him. That's the only place you can get your news. If I can only have a musket, then that's the only place you can get your news. So that kind of stuff is nonsense. But we do have to try to figure out how to apply that concept today with today's technology. And that's the part that people struggle with. And that leads me to another argument that I'm not going to necessarily answer, but this is one I heard just last night, and that is a guy said, okay, so I can have nukes. And there was some argument back and forth between some other people. My thoughts on that argument are, I can't answer that argument because, honestly, I don't want just anybody to have nukes. In fact, I wish nobody had nukes. I think nukes are a very bad thing. Now, I think that some good have come out of nukes, or some relative good, which is really strange to say, but I think that nukes have saved some lives in the past. They've obviously cost some lives as well. I don't like the idea of anybody having that kind of power. But let's say for a second, because that's an argument that gets thrown up quite often. But let's say for a second, no, you can't have nukes. Does that mean I have to go turn my pistol in? That's a ridiculous argument. Let's just agree for a second that nobody can have nukes. What now? Do we strike the Second Amendment? And people dial it back and they're like, well, a tank. You can't have a tank. Actually, I probably could go get a tank, depending on how much money I've got and if I want to secure the paperwork and all that, or go through that process. I could probably go get a tank. There are people that have tanks. Even in Britain, there are people that have tanks. What about a fighter jet? Could I get a fighter jet? Well, yeah. It depends on the jet, and it depends on how much money you want to spend. But that stuff's absurd. Like, let's say, no, you can't have any of that stuff. Do I have to go put my pistol? Do I lose my Second Amendment right to have a rifle or a pistol? That's ridiculous. Of course I don't. So those arguments are completely irrelevant. They couldn't be more irrelevant to the Second Amendment argument. Now, if we could find a line, right, where we say, okay, you can have all these guns, and that is reasonable, then there would be pushing back and forth on this line. We would want more, they would want us to have less, and that's kind of what we're doing, but we're discussing the line way down here, or that's the way I feel. We're discussing the line way down over here, and quite frankly, I'm tired of fighting over my right to carry a semi-automatic pistol. There's no reason why this. Well, I'll stop yammering about that. If you want me to stop carrying a pistol, you should have to change the Second Amendment. You should have to change the Constitution so the Second Amendment no longer says that I can carry a pistol or even a rifle for that case, for that matter. So anyway, I kind of lost my train of thought there, but the basic idea is the argument that I have against people who are scared of constitutional carry, or my argument to them is, first, you need to change the Constitution. If this scares you and you think that it's a problem, go change the Constitution. We can talk about crime stats, which are really muddy. Those are really, really dirty. I think that they favor gun rights rather than gun control most often. But they're really, really dirty. Most statistics and data are really, really dirty. But we can talk about that. And I would say that if you do change the Constitution and you say that, the Second Amendment no longer exists, the world, America, is going to get more dangerous in some ways. It'll probably get safer in some, but it'll get more dangerous in others. But that's a different argument. My argument right now, my argument right now in this video is that you have no right, and the government has no right, to restrict my capability to keep and bear arms, because the Second Amendment guarantees me that right and guarantees me that the government will not interfere or infringe upon that right. So that's my primary argument. We can talk about the other stuff later. I don't want to argue about nukes, because even if I agreed, that doesn't change anything. I don't want to argue about army tanks, because even if I agreed with you, that's completely irrelevant to the conversation that we're having. What I really want to talk about is the Second Amendment, and does the Second Amendment matter or not? Does it mean what it says or does it not? Does the First Amendment mean what it says or does it not? And I think that people really need to stop and think about that. Do we care about the Bill of Rights or do we not? Do we want to change what they all say? Do we want to force them into a 1780 time frame, or do we want to change the wording and force them into a 2020 time frame? Or do we want to try to understand what was meant and what was intended by those words that were said for a country to last as long as possible, to give its people the most freedom possible so that they could be as successful as possible, which has happened, by the way. America is the greatest nation, and there are a lot of other countries, I love them, but America has had a lot more opportunity for its people in most cases than any other country. If you make good decisions and you work hard, you're going to be better off for it in America. And that's not always the case in every country. And there's bad luck here too, and there are things that get in the way here. We're not a perfect country by any means. But we got to take what the Founding Fathers intended, because intent matters more than content. And we have to say, okay, how do we apply this today? We can't change what it says without changing the Constitution. If you want to change the Constitution, or make the attempt. But until you put your money where your mouth is, let's stop arguing over the fact that the Constitution guarantees me those rights. Okay? So if it guarantees me those rights, then it guarantees me those rights. And I'm tired of having to jump through hoops to obtain my rights that I already have guaranteed. So that's the frustration that gun carriers have, and that's the frustration when people start arguing with us about constitutional carry being passed in Oklahoma, and like how, you know, I've been asked, how is this a good thing? And then I've been told it's not. It's going to make the state more dangerous. Well, we'll see. I don't think it will. I don't think it has in any other state where it's passed. Nothing. It doesn't turn states into the wild, wild west, and there are other states that have passed constitutional carry before Oklahoma. But I'm kind of tired of having those conversations when the simple fact is it's the Constitution, right? It either means something or it doesn't. So hopefully I've made my point clear. I've tried a few times. I've actually reshot this video a few times. So just talking about my holster earlier made me think about it again. I've never really liked how they've turned out. So hopefully this has made some sort of sense. Feel free to talk in the comments about it. Ask questions. We can debate if we need to. Yeah, I don't have a problem with the debate. But I think sometimes the frustration for me is that sometimes the conversation goes to nukes, or it goes to England not having guns, or Australia or something like that. And those are things we can talk about. Those are things where we can say, okay, does it make the country safer? Does it make it less safe? You know, how many lives does it save? All that kind of stuff. We can talk about that stuff. But we got to change the Constitution if you guys want to change the Constitution. And, you know, anyway, I've said it before, I'll say it again. I'm tired of jumping through hoops to just observe my Second Amendment right. And I don't think people should have to do that. Just like I don't think they should have to jump through hoops for their First Amendment rights. So I think I've beat that dead horse to death 5 times over. So I'm going to shut up now. But anyway, hopefully that's not too confusing. I tend to be confusing and ramble on. Ask me for clarification if anybody needs it. So thanks for watching. Take care.